Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Tov. This is another Dvar Torah brought to you from TorahAnyTime.com. We are now starting the week, and we're heading through the Parashat of Vaeira, which God says, I will show, because Moshe Rabbeinu in last week's Parashat, in the end, said to God, why are you doing this to the Jewish people in Egypt? They're suffering more since I've come here. And God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Vaeira, don't worry, I'll show you, I will bring plagues among the land of Egypt, I will harden the heart of Pharaoh, and I will show them all the miracles that I'm going to do until he lets my Jewish people out of Egypt. And we know the story of Exodus is really a historical event. There's been many productions about this, about this story. There's been movies, there's been books written. It's embedded in our history, deep down, this whole story of the Jews leaving Egypt, the Ten Commandments and so on. And the fundamental question our sages ask over this whole period of time, when the plagues were given and the miracles were done in Egypt, is, if God could do everything, and is Hakol Yachol, there's nothing He cannot do, why did He have to go and do through this whole process of giving the 10 plagues? I mean, obviously He made great movies afterwards, but in a more serious note, He could have wiped out the Egyptians in one shot and taken us out of Egypt. What was the whole purpose of going through this whole exodus, of having every time 10 plagues, the plague of blood, the plague of frogs, the plague of lice, and every time going and Moshe going to Pharaoh and saying, let my people out, and if you don't, I'm going to bring you the next plague. And the next plague comes, and Pharaoh says, okay, I'll let them out. And then he says, no, I'm not going to let them out. Moshe running again. It's like a yo-yo, it's like a game. Moshe is saying, let them out. Pharaoh saying, I won't. Then the plague comes, and Pharaoh says, I will. The plague goes away. Pharaoh says, I won't again. Next plague comes. I mean, the story is going on and on and on. What is the main purpose of going through all these plagues? If God could just, in one blow, kill all the Egyptians and take the Jews out. That's the whole purpose. So Nachmanides, one of the great sages, he says in the end of next week's parasha, a very interesting, fundamental point in the whole story of the Exodus of Egypt. And many great Hachamim said, when they want to strengthen their self in belief, they would read this Nachmanides. Just by reading it, it gives you a different look and a different version of what Exodus is all about. And he says that really, of course, God could have given the one blow to the Egyptians and we would have been out of Egypt. Of course, there's no question about it. The reason why God gave 10 plagues was not for the Egyptians, but it was to strengthen the belief, the faith of the Jewish people residing in the land of Egypt. You have to understand, the Jews were there for 210 years now. They become part of the Egyptian culture. They lost their faith, many of them, most of them, through God and through the Jewish culture that they had when they first got there. They were made slaves, they were put into bondage. It's very difficult for them to continue their faith. So God said, if I want to take the Jewish people out of Egypt and bring them to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah and to become my people, first of all, I need to strengthen their emunah, strengthen their belief, their faith in me, says God. Only then I could take them out as a strong nation. And that's why the 10 plagues were given, not for the sake of the Egyptians. God could have wiped them out in one shot. He did it slowly as a process to strengthen the belief of the Jewish people there. And he says there were 3 types of Jews in Egypt living at that time. There was one type who did not believe that a God existed at all, as we call them today, atheists. God did not exist, there was no such thing. Then there was a second level of Jews, a bit more religious, believed that God existed, but did not believe that God He existed, but God forbid that He created the world, He existed, but He's not with us anymore today. He's not involving Himself in our lives today. Things that happen to us in our life, it's nothing to do with God, it's without the hand of God. That's called in Hebrew hashgacha pratit, divine providence. And there's a third group of Jews who are a little bit more stronger in belief. They believe that God created the world. They believe that there's hashgacha pratit. God didn't just go away after He created the world, but He's still with us today, and He's involved in our lives today. But they didn't believe that He's a kol yachol, that He could do everything, even against nature, supernatural God, so to say. So God had to give these 10 plagues to strengthen these 3 groups of Jews. And before He gave them these 3 plagues, He gave an introduction, these 3 sets of plagues out of the 10. He gave an introduction before each set of plague, why He's giving them the plagues. It's not an introduction from a sage, it's not an introduction from a rabbi, this is an introduction from God Himself in the Torah. So if you turn to chapter 7, verse 17, I'll read you the text. It says as follows: Ko Amar Hashem, so said God. Why am I giving you the first 3 plagues? An introduction here. Have you ever heard of an introduction in the Bible itself, in the Torah? Why am I giving you the first 3 plagues? Bezot Teida, in order you should know, you Jewish people living in Egypt should know, Ki Ani Hashem, that I am God. That's it. First introduction. And the first 3 plagues are there to strengthen the Jews who didn't believe that God even created the world. An atheist type of Jew. What were the first 3 plagues? The first plague was blood. If we know that Paro made himself the god of the river Nile in Egypt. That's what they got. Egypt doesn't have a problem with water because of the Nile. And Paro used to say he's the god of the Nile. So Hashem said, the creator of the universe, God said to Paro, you really think you are the god of the Nile? I'll turn your whole god, your whole river, into blood. And then we'll see how much power you have over this river Nile. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu did. God made the first plague and turned into blood. All the water was in blood. And we know the stories. We have to get into it now. That when the Jew went to take water, it would turn into water. When the Egyptian went, it came into blood. So that's, first of all, I am a God in the world. Plague number 2, Tzefardea, the frogs as well. Moshe Rabbeinu hit the land of the seashore where the water is, and the frogs came out of the sea, again, to show there was a God. And the third plague was lice, kinim. The difference between the first 2 plagues and the third plague was the first 2 plagues the Egyptians could do as well, through their magician, through their magic. But when it came to doing the third plague, there were lice all over the Egyptian's body. It was so irresistible, it was so terrible. Nobody could bear it. Lice all over the body. It was such a terrible plague for them that when the Egyptians even tried to do it themselves, because each plague they wanted to show they could do the same thing. Here, when they tried to do it, they couldn't do it. And the pasuk, the verse says, when it came to the plague of lice, V'hi etzba Elokim hi. This is the finger of God. Even the Egyptians came to the conclusion that this plague comes from a higher power than that we ever know of. This has nothing to do with magic. This is God Himself. And that was the first 3 plagues. The first 3 plagues was the introduction, verse 7, 17. Ko Amar Hashem, so says God, I'm giving you the first 3 plagues. Bezot Teidaki Ani Hashem, because I am God. Now let's go to the next set of plagues. We said the next set of plagues was to prove that not only is there a God in the world, but that God is still existing, alive, and involved in our lives. In our day-to-day lives, it's called Hashgacha Pratit. So if we turn to chapter 8, verse 18, so it's easy to remember. 7:17, 8:18. The Torah says, a new introduction, why I'm giving the next set of plagues. For those who think that I just created the world, and I have gone, God forbid, and I've left this world, and I'm not involved privately with every single person, here we go. New introduction. He says the pasuk, 8:18. Leman teida, I'm giving you the next set of plagues. Ki ani Hashem, because I am a God. But it doesn't stop over there. Another 2 more words. B'kerev haaretz, in the midst of the land. Not only am I a God who created the world and is left, God forbid, I'm here, I'm in the midst of the land, I'm a God in the midst of the land, I'm involved with every single individual. It's called Hashgacha Pratit. Where do we know that for the next set of plagues? It's very simple. What was the next 3 plagues? Wild animals came. And we all know the stories that when God said the wild animals to Egypt, the animals only killed the Egyptians who were walking on the streets. But when the Jews were walking in the land of Goshen, the animals didn't touch them. And the Midrash tells us stories that the Egyptians thought they were clever. They took Jewish kids with them and Egyptian kids with them walking. So the animals cannot differentiate between the two. And the Midrash says that when the lions and tigers came out, because the plague was full of wild animals, God said the whole zoo, the whole LA zoo was sent to destroy the land of Egypt, the world zoo. So there was animals running all over the place. But when the Egyptians took Jewish kids and Egyptian kids, the lion, says the Midrash, could make this distinction. Not because of his clothes he was wearing, but could make the distinction between the Egyptians and between the Jews. And it went and ate up the Egyptians and did not touch the Jewish people. Says God, what kind of more divine providence is there? Not only am I a God who created the world, but I know I'm involved with every one of you. I know you. I could tell the difference. Who's Jewish, who's not. I could be involved in your lives. That's the wild animals. And the boils that came all over the bodies afterwards as well. Only came to the Egyptian bodies, not the Jewish bodies. And the diseases of eating up all the crop that came afterwards, exactly the same thing. Here we see that there is a God existing in the world. Here we see that not only is there a God, but He's involved in our day and day lives. And then comes the last set of 4 plagues, which God gives another introduction. Why am I giving the next set of 4 plagues? Says the Ramban. Where is the introduction to be found? Chapter 9, verse, this time it's not 19, but it's 14. It says God as following. Ki b'pa'am hazot, this time, why am I giving you the next set of plagues? Ba'avur teida, and all that you should know, ki ein kamoni b'chol haaretz. There is no existence in the whole world like me. Not only am I a God who created the world, not only am I a God who is involved in your day-to-day lives, and I haven't left, but you're going to see supernatural powers against nature that nobody could do, that only I could do. And that's again to strengthen the third type of Jews who didn't believe so. And the last 4 plagues, we know the plague of hail, for example. First of all, there was never hail ever in the land of Egypt. Hail came down, and it came down together with fire. It didn't just come down hail that we know, little pieces of ice. It was blocks of ice that came down with a burning fire. And we know it's contradictory, because the water puts out the fire. It doesn't make sense to go together. But that itself was against nature. And it came down through Egypt. Then we have the plague of darkness, also against nature. For 3 days, God stopped the sun in Egypt and made it dark for 24 hours a day. It was so dark that the Egyptians, the Midrashim tell us, they couldn't even get up from their chairs. They couldn't see anything. And whenever a Jew walked, a Jew had light. Wasn't that an amazing, not natural force that could only come through God, who could do anything, even supernatural? And then we have the plague of obviously the last plague as well, the plague of Makot Bechorot, the death of the firstborn. That exactly at that split second, every single firstborn of Egypt died. There wasn't a house, the Midrash, the Torah tells us, that didn't have a cry in there. But all the houses of the Jews, nothing was touched. Here we see, ladies and gentlemen, why God needed to give 10 plagues. It was not for the Egyptian purpose. Of course, God could have wiped out the Egyptians in one shot, and we could have gone freely out of Egypt. But it was for us. It was us Jewish people to strengthen our belief in God, to become more faithful to God, to realize God is in charge of this universe. Not only did He create it, but He's with us in our day-to-day lives. He controls everything. Everything that happens is for a reason. There's nothing natural. There's no natural occurrence that happens in the world. Everything is in the hand of God. This is the belief that the Jews needed in Egypt to strengthen themselves before they left as a nation. And this is a belief that we need ourselves here today in the diaspora too. We don't have miracles like they had in Egypt. We don't have them. We don't see them today. Many Jews say, if only I would see God give me a miracle. Supernatural miracles. That's not the point. God gave these supernatural miracles in the time of Egypt. And we have to know that's our blueprint. That there's a God existing in this world. He's controlling everything that's happening. By the way, just on the side, on Pesach, the custom is in all Jewish families that when we take a cup of wine and we pour it out into another cup and we say the 10 plagues, Dam, Tzfardea, Kinim, Arov, Afterwards we say Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says he gave a sign to all the 10 plagues. And he says, Tetzach adash be'achav. So the sages ask, what sign is Rabbi Yehuda giving? He takes the 10 plagues and he takes the first letter of each plague and he splits them into 3. Tetzach adash be'achav. I mean, any child can take 10 plagues and make a sign and split them. What is Rabbi Yehuda, who's such a great man, coming to teach us? And the answer is Rabbi Yehuda is telling us what we just spoke now for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. That these are the 3 sections. Tetzach is the first 3 plagues of the Jews who didn't believe that a God existed. Adash is the second set of plagues, didn't believe of divine providence. And Be'achav is the last set, supernatural powers that God has. So this is, ladies and gentlemen, our blueprint. And we need to realize that everything that happens to us, we have to know, whether it's for the good or for the bad, or anything that happens in the world, there's a God with us. There's a God standing behind everything. It's not like other religions in the world, like Christianity, that believe there's different powers. God forbid. There's a power of good, there's a power of bad, there's different forces. In Jewish tradition, everything that happens is all from the same God. Shema Yisrael, we say every day. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem is written, the letters are written with the God of attribute, the God of mercy. Yud Kei Vav Kei. Elokeinu is the God of judgment. And we put them both together. Hashem Elokeinu, both the God of mercy and both the God of judgment. Hashem Echad, it's all one. That's what monotheism is all about. That's our Jewish belief. So just like the Jews in Egypt had to strengthen their faith before they left as a nation, many of us here are living in America, living in the diaspora. We need to learn the story of Exodus. We need to go deeper in the story, in the parasha of the Jews leaving Exodus, not by watching the movie The 10 Commandments, but going deeper and learning what our sages teach us, what our rabbis teach us, and realize that God is with our lives till this very day. And always will be. He controls the world. Nobody else controls the world. That's why everything we do is to remember the Exodus of Egypt. We make Kiddush on Friday night. We say Zecher Etziat Mitzrayim. On our tefillin, it says the words Zecher Etziat Mitzrayim. On our mezuzot and our doorposts, we say Zecher. Actually, there's a mitzvah every day to remember the Exodus of Egypt. Why? Because by remembering the plagues and the miracles God did, it strengthens our belief. We're in times that we need to put and strengthen our beliefs to us, to our children, to our families. And we have it here, written in the parasha. When we have more faith and more belief in God, our life becomes more happier and more fulfilled and more sustained. I wish you all a great week. Shavua Tov.